So, Marcia, kudos to your videography team and
Thanks,
to
Bob.
and to our colleague Rachel Lipson, who went out to Lorraine and was the off-camera interviewer. So why don't we start by actually asking each of you guys to kind of introduce yourselves in the sequence that I see you on the screen. Jonathan, let's start with you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Our president, Dr. Mary S. Graham, was not able to join us, so she was so kind to ask me to join you guys today. My role is Executive Vice President at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, and I, like you, am looking forward to learning a lot this morning and hearing from all of our colleagues.
Thank you. I've lost the rest of my screen, but we'll go to Marcia. Actually, you've introduced yourself already on the screen, but say hello to the audience if you would.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to join all of you. Thank you.
Brenda.
Hi, I'm Brenda Hellier, and I serve as Chancellor of San Jacinto College, and we are in the Gulf Coast region, the Houston region, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Lee.
Good morning, everybody. Lee Lambert, Chancellor of the Pima Community College District. We're located about 1 hour from the border with Nogales and Sonora, Mexico. Glad to be on.
Great. And Anne.
Hi, Ann Krause, President, Northern Virginia Community College. We're located just outside DC.
Great. First, thanks to all of you for opening up your campuses to our case writers. We simply couldn't have done this on a tight timeline without really close cooperation and collaboration with you folks. And while I'm thinking of it, I want to publicly acknowledge and thank our terrific graduate student case writers, some of whom I think are with us today. Haley Glatter, who did the Lorraine case, Sakshi Chalwar, who did the San Jacinto case, Furman Haynes did Nova, Rachel Boroditsky, Pima, and Annalisa Sorrells for Mississippi Gulf Coast. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to have a conversation, the six of us, focused on 4 or 5 topics that really kind of leapt out to me as I read across the cases. We are going to keep the chat function open, so you can participate as well. That is by asking questions or making comments as we proceed. After about 40 minutes, Rachel Lipson is going to kind of be monitoring the chat function, and will curate and offer up 2 or 3 questions for us that seem to resonate with more than one participant. And then at 12:05, I think, as you know, we're going to move into randomly assigned breakout sessions for just about 20 minutes. We'll have a prompt to stimulate a conversation for 20 minutes. Then we're going to come back in full group at about 12:25 to get some closing remarks from Maria Flynn, wonderful colleague and friend who's the CEO of Jobs for the Future, and JFF is serving as the co-sponsor, if you will, of this convening. So the first topic I want to get to is really kind of student focused, and the question kind of on my mind, and what struck me sort of reading across these cases, is that you guys don't seem to leave it to chance as to how students are going to figure out how to really get a career focus and how to get it early in their tenure. And Marshall, let me start with you, because one of the things that didn't pop up, and obviously we had to make a lot of choices in this 8-minute video, but one of the things that didn't come up that really was intriguing to me is your Career by Design initiative, which it seems to me, among other things, is a strategy to engage a much broader pool of staff and faculty in the kind of career advising game, and to help them become more knowledgeable, particularly about your regional labor market and where the job opportunities are. So say a word about that, if you would.
Sure. Thanks so much, Bob. The Career by Design has really been a way for Lorain County Community College to operationalize that connectivity between labor market outcomes, students, and career choices. And it aligns with our guided pathways framework. So we took a page out of our playbook that goes back some years now to when Lorain County Community College became one of the Gates Foundation's completion by design colleges. And that framework continues to serve us extremely well, where we look at a continuum that starts with that connection point, that entry, the progression, and then completion. And so the aha that occurred to us just as we were moving into the pandemic was, how do we take that same framework where we're engaged, where students are engaged with careers, they're engaged with their education, with employers, but cast it even wider. And so we created Career by Design, utilizing that same framework, and then working with our economic development intermediary in Northeast Ohio, which is called Team NEO. Team NEO works with employers throughout the region, works with the state of Ohio in terms of bringing new industries, but it also does deep research, both qualitative and quantitative, with regard to what are the opportunities in Northeast Ohio, what's our talent supply, and how are we looking at it through an equity lens as well. I have the great privilege of serving as the co-chair for the Talent Development Council for Team NEO, and on that board. And so as I would take some of the lessons away from that, bringing them back to the college to look at how do we institutionalize that, it was really our senior leaders from our enrollment and career services, working with institutional research, and then throughout campus, to co-design with Team NEO a badging series that looked at every type of career in high demand and ensuring that those high demand careers in our talent supply were aligned. And then our advisors, our career development specialists, our outreach team, our faculty were deeply engaged in recognizing and understanding what those opportunities are, what the employment outlook is for them, and then rethinking how we embed that in a very different way throughout everything that includes first year experience to our career connections. And then we created a badging series that was very immersive and in-depth that over 40 individuals have already completed. So it's taking careers to a new level and ensuring that we are meeting students not only where they are, but aligning those with in-demand, high-paying careers.
That's great. And, Brenda, I know you put a lot of intentionality into the onboarding of students, and I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, and in particular, how you make sure that early on they get enough information to make informed choices about what kind of majors they want to pursue. One of the things that really struck me in the Sanjak case is that over 5 years, you've managed to drive down the number of folks who walk out the door with a general studies degree, which I think, as we all know, runs the risk of having less value in the labor market unless you go on to complete a 4-year degree. So tell us a bit about your strategy.
All right, thank you, Bob. So we have a mandatory orientation for all first time in college students coming into the system. And during that, they use the Focus 2 assessment that helps them understand their talents. So many times we get first time in college that don't have any idea what they want to do. They don't know where they connect. So this helps them see what their talents are and how that might connect into different programs. And it also helps us see other non-cognitive issues that they might have around food insecurity and other needs. And so that really helps us get that framework during mandatory orientation, and then they go into their mandatory advising meeting. If we have, as they go through that, they're also getting labor market data around all the programs. And we have that on the website so they can access it there, but they are also getting it in their advising meeting. And we, through our PathWorks ways work, did a lot of alignment around those entry-level positions, the living wage, a family living wage, and how that aligned with our credentials. And so we're real upfront around that. We're also very clear that, yes, in this field, a certificate may be adequate. Associate degree may get you into the jobs, and we've got a lot of jobs that go for certificates and associate degree. But if you're thinking you're going to be a psychologist, an associate degree is not going to get you where you need to be. So we align and make sure they understand all those components around labor market data and expectations around what you really need from a credentialing degree standpoint. If by 15 hours, students are still in general studies, they again have a mandatory advising meeting. And that's where, again, we start talking to them about what's your next piece that you're going to do here. You need to start making a decision. Some will remain in general studies, but it's not letting them just randomly continue through that pathway and really sitting down and talking with them and letting them ask the questions. I think those mandatory points of advising and actually putting holds on students' enrollment until they come in and have those appointments makes a huge difference in helping them understand the process. And I think so many times we start a process and we don't necessarily know, okay, what's the longer term impact of it? I'm sure you all get the students that say, I'm just here for my basics. Well, what's that really mean? And after they've been through a few semesters, they understand their different decisions that they could make. And so we're very specific. We're very mandatory means mandatory, and we check that, and then we really help to guide the students along and making sure that they've got a lot of resources out there, like I said, on our website. And so those are key components of making sure that those students get what they need to help them make decisions.
Thanks. So this topic obviously applies to what at least I think of as a kind of more traditional, what we used to think of as a traditional community college student. They're basically to seek at least a 2-year degree to then get started. But as we all know, that we have many, many, many more people now showing up, not only adults who are already fairly far along, but even young people who say, hey, I'm just looking for a credential that can get me into the labor market and get me into the labor market quickly. And you guys have all been forced to kind of respond to that demand in different ways. The Lorraine video gave us one example of this free 16-week fast track program, which among other things has brought a more diverse population into the college. But Anne, when I think about these 5 institutions, in some ways you were the most, Nova, at least historically, I always thought of it, this is mainly a sort of transfer-oriented institution serving mostly young people. And obviously that's shifting. How are you responding to this new demand, if you will, for shorter term credentials?
Sure, it's a great question. Certainly, Nova's always been a very strong transfer institution, and our partnership with Mason is nationally recognized around that. And that's still the majority of our audience. But our fastest growing audience is really in these non-credit credentials. And so it's Nova, but it's also the Commonwealth of Virginia. So the Commonwealth has a program called Fast Forward, which is around industry recognized credentials that can be delivered in a very short-term format. They're regional. So, what we would offer at Nova might differ from what you might see at Tidewater Community College, for example. They're very much tied to our local industries. And so we need to be able to say to folks that they're going to be connected to a credential that will find them employment in the region, right? They don't have to pick up and move. And so what we're talking about is programs that are typically less than 4 months. These programs are subsidized by the Commonwealth of Virginia. So the state will pay about 2/3. The student's responsible for 1/3 of the cost. There are financial aid opportunities for non-credit, which is fairly rare in these sorts of programs. And so students can access Fantic, they can access G3, which in Virginia is sort of a workforce promise scholarship to participate in these programs. And then they'll walk out with an industry recognized credential, for us largely in healthcare or in IT. I think the significant thing that is driving this enrollment is the real wage gains. So the State Council on Higher Education for Virginia did a study and found that folks who walked out with one of these industry recognized credentials saw real wage gains of about 31% If they actually earn the certificate, the certification, because that's not a requirement of the program, if they earn that certification, their wage gains were greater, closer to 40%. We've seen that cost has been a barrier for folks to sit for some of these licensure exams or their IT certifications. So Nova now pays for that and provides sort of an exam boot camp for students who complete the programs in good standing, which has been fantastic. So what you're talking about for individuals in the lowest income bracket is actually wage gains of about 400%. When we were able to offer this financial aid to some of the discussion that Lorraine provided in the video, we saw an incredible increase in the diversity of students who are accessing the Fast Forward programs. And in fact, our fastest growing populations are individuals of color. The average student age of a student who's in one of these Fast Forward programs is about 30. And what's really important is that even though they're non-credit, these are students who can access all other student benefits at Nova. So they can access our financial stability and advocacy centers, including single stop access to benefits platforms. They can access our food pantries. They can access our child care assistance grants. They can access our telemental health counseling. So they have access to all of the wraparound services. And then what we've been able to do is partner with employers so that many of these programs then will end in guaranteed interviews so that students also know that they'll be put in front of folks who are really actively looking for individuals and want to interview them before they exit the program so that they're hired before they leave. And then they can access our business engagement center, which provides them with career coaching, helps them optimize anything they want to put out there on LinkedIn or Indeed.com so that employers see them, and then runs job fairs. So I think that's one of the reasons why, quite frankly, this is growing so quickly among communities who really see that need to find not just a first job or a next job, but a career pathway, is because it's proven that it works.
And you've clearly picked two high demand, high growth fields where there are opportunities for people without 4-year degrees or even 2-year degrees is what you're saying. Since you meant this activity all occurs on the non-credit side, but presumably there are opportunities to stack credentials, et cetera, and to encourage people to move on to degree programs. This for me raises a big question that I'm going to try to get several of you into, and that is, how do you all seem to, how do I put this? Disrespect the notion that there's non-credit over here and there's credit over here and never shall the twain meet. And Jonathan, Mississippi Gulf Coast has, what to me is a really interesting organizational strategy for breaking down this division. And it's your house strategy. Talk about that. Where did it come from? How's it organized? And what are the impacts on both faculty and students?
Sure. Well, as we several years ago considered trying to bridge this divide between credit and non-credit, our institution has been around since 1911. So that activity began with a little self-actualization. We literally were structured divided. We had within the structure of our institution, workforce, or for us, workforce means non-credit on this side of the house and credit on this side of the house. In addition to that, within the credit programs, we had departments structured on the university parallel academic side and different departments, although they may be teaching the same subject matter, career and technical education on these departments. So we completely destroyed all of that, and we have created a new organizational model that features 8 schools. And these 8 schools, some people may consider them akin to meta majors or large pathways, but the magic is that these schools encompass both academic transfer and career and technical education credit and non-credit. So within one school, you have all of the like programs by sector. We are literally organized to remove the barriers between these different pursuits. This has led to a lot of things, not least of which is shared space, shared resources, shared faculty. So you're taking faculty that may be hired on the credit side that have a high credential value, and now we can offer that to the industry partner. It also allows us to leverage work-based learning strategies, such as internships. We do a lot of apprenticeship, and we can crosswalk the RTI and apprenticeship programs now right over to competency-based education and to the credit programs. This has been a game changer for our institution and the community, but most importantly, for the students who now no longer need to feel like I'm going to get a non-credit credential that's industry recognized with no clear pathway to an associate, or in many, many cases, a Bachelor of Applied Science or a master's degree. So that's some of the stuff we've done from an organizational standpoint.
Great. I think I misnamed it, but it's the school strategy, not a house strategy. That's great. Thanks. Lee, I want to bring you into this. You, when you arrived at Pima, you had, among other things, you had 6 campuses, each with their own administrative hierarchy. Today, Pima has 5 campuses with 1 president, similar, I think, to San Jacinto. But you made 2 other decisions early on that are really relevant to this conversation. First, if I understood it correctly, you said workforce is so central to our mission that we need to do 2 things. We need to pay for it ourselves. Your workforce unit and workforce and continuing education, as in a lot of community colleges, are kind of a separate division that needs to raise their own resources. And presumably you saw a problem with that. And I want you to talk about that. But the other thing you did was you appointed a vice president for workforce development. And you said to the business community, he and his team are now the central point of contact for employers. No more having to scramble around across these various campuses and figure out who do I talk to. But you also empowered him to work across the institution internally as well. So there was no confusion on the internal side. If we want to do partnering, we know who the point of contact is. Talk about what the impact of those decisions has been, particularly on sort of blurring the line between credit and non-credit. Ian Rourke, your VP, works across those divisions. And it just seems to me, I mean, I've heard you guys say, a learner is a learner is a learner, basically not distinguishing much between who's here for credit and who's here for non-credit. So talk about that.
Thank you, Bob, for the question. So let me put it in this larger context for a moment. So I came in with the philosophy that partnerships are going to be essential to our success going forward, and grounded in that is this notion of engagement, alignment, and outcomes. So as I was engaging the community at large, as well as the business community specifically, I kept hearing over and over again, we don't know who to interface with at Pima Community College in terms of getting our workforce needs met. So that became the outgrowth of realizing that I've got to create a single point of contact, create a position that would allow that alignment to start to occur. So that was one critical component of that. Another critical component was we took a data-informed, evidence-based approach to understand the actual workforce needs of the community. So we brought in the Smith Group, who helped us map through data what was actually needed in the community, what were the high demand opportunities, high wage opportunities, high growth opportunities. So out of that, we created these centers of excellence. And then we pressure tested them by inviting the community in to tell us, did we get it right? So we didn't just rely on, this initial consultant work to make sure we got it right. We pressure tested to make sure we got it right. So that was another component of this. And then we had to really rethink how we funded and supported workforce. It, like many colleges, was one of these self-supporting operations to the side. So we looked at and said, we need to bring that in and make it more integrated and be part of our general fund, support it that way. Yes, there's expectations that they generate resources, et cetera. So that doesn't go away, but it's how you support that. And then we use this notion of a matrix organization. So they are responsible to cut across, they're a horizontal that cuts across all of our academic divisions. So they're there to support it. So this notion, and it came up earlier, we use this notion of a universal design around curriculum. So if you're going to build credit programming, we'll build it with non-credit in mind as well. They're not separate things. Why do separate development when it can just be all integrated? So it all led to that approach. So single point of contact, a matrix approach to things, self-support. And then the final piece I will say is this has all led to me sitting on the executive committee of our local economic development organization, Sun Corridor, and many others, because as the business community saw that PIMA's responsiveness, alignment, and then focus on centers of excellence, all of a sudden we're at the table at a lot of places now. We didn't go in and ask to be at the table. We demonstrated our value to be at the table.
That is a great segue into the big topic I really want to spend the rest of our time on, and that is how you all work with your industry partners. I was looking for a term. Employer engagement strikes me as way too weak a term to describe the relationships that you've built with employers. And as Lee just said, I mean, I think in a sense you've earned credibility with them by your responsiveness, and that has then enabled you to get invited to more and more tables. So you really are kind of integrated in a really serious way. And Brenda, let's let you kick off this this topic, because I know enough about San Jacinto to know this is something you do really, really well.
Thank you. So all community colleges have advisory committees, right? We all have them. They function, some better than others. But what we really did, and what Lee talked about, was earning that credibility, was we have created chancellors advisory councils. And these are at a C-suite level. And they are me inviting those C-suite players to the table. And I've got them in petrochemical, maritime. We have it in global logistics, healthcare. We've added some as we have moved forward. But it has really been the dynamic to get more strategic around what we need to do to be that demonstrated resource for industry. And we have done it at different levels, at different times. And I'm going to give you some maritime and commercial aerospace were startup programs. And those are much easier to do than programs that you've got in place already. And with maritime, we were invited with several institutions to be at the table to help design some kind of a workforce training program. Our region has about 39,000 mariners in different lines of work. And so how did we need to support this framework? What we did was really use some of Jonathan's strategies. Is we aligned the credit and the non-credit side of the house. And we were able to listen to industry. We took some risk, I think, but we developed that non-credit program to really test the waters in the maritime industry. And we had never done U.S. Coast Guard approved curriculum. We didn't know what that meant, and so we did some things like we contracted out with somebody who knew how to do that, a maritime academy, and brought that in-house. We listened to the industry partners, got the initial training going in a warehouse in the middle of our industrial park. And as we demonstrated that we could listen and then respond, we eventually built out on the water, and we developed the first credit maritime administration associate degree in Texas. And while that facility, that program area is largely non-credit still, it has that credit program aligned with it, and it is meeting the industry needs. On petrochemical, we've been in that business a long time, since the late 60s into the 70s. And the industry has gone through lots of ups and downs. I pulled together a chancellor's advisory council because things were picking up in that industry. And we needed to understand if we were meeting the workforce needs. Everything that we were hearing, again, being involved in the economic development groups, was telling us we weren't. And in that particular case, I started the conversation with these C-suite leaders as I need the good, bad, and the ugly of what we're doing, how we're meeting your needs, and where we're not. Starting the conversation with good, bad, and ugly until your partners really trust you. And again, I've had relationships with these people at the table, but you're starting a whole different level of conversation. And so at first they were giving us all the good, and I made it real frank. I needed the bad and the ugly. We got to figure out what are your needs and how we're going to support it. And having those conversations, making it very clear we're here to listen, We're not here to have any excuses. And we're going to come up with solutions together and to collaborate was really, I think, the power behind what we needed. Even to a standpoint where we designed the meetings where industry leaders were at the table with me and just a couple of key members from the college, and the rest of our team, deans, some faculty, were behind the industry group because we wanted to really make sure that conversation was industry led. And I think what made the difference then is we responded. In both situations, we hired industry leaders who had retired. They didn't have higher education background, but they knew what the industry needed to help us bridge that gap between education and industry. Now, we had somebody that was beside them the whole way from education so that we could make sure, well, what do we need to do from a curriculum standpoint? But it was never that we were going to not listen to them. It was more around how do we bring this back and figure out how to make it work in our education system. And so it was a real investment again in hiring those experts, making sure that we were at the table listening and that we were going to make results. I remember one conversation, we had designed a facility to meet these needs, and industry said, you need to start over. That's not going to do it. And we went back to the drawing board. And if you look at our facilities, Petrochemical will tell them that the facility we have now is a facility designed by industry for industry. I think even another conversation was around some welding curriculum. And one of the industry players said, you know, you guys can keep doing it that way because some of our faculty were reluctant, but we're not going to hire your people. You got to create those kind of relationships where you're getting that feedback and then that you're being responsive. And was it a little difficult at times managing the internal conversations and the internal reaction? Sure. But if we didn't, we were going to miss the boat. And Lee, you brought up a really important point about data. We needed data around the petrochemical industry to really understand where the labor market needs were now and in the future. And we partnered along with a couple of other community colleges because we got a regional issue around workforce here with those industry partners doing surveys and getting the labor market data for what they needed now and what their projections were five years down the road. And so to see that kind of partnership between industry and multiple community colleges was pretty powerful to get the data that we could really respond to. But it's a much different approach than I think we normally look at with our advisory committees.
Thank you, Brenda. We got time for one more comment on this general topic of both working with industry and kind of positioning yourselves to be kind of central players in your region's economic strategy. It does strike me as a kind of virtuous circle here in that building those relationships, not simply aligning your programs with business needs, but helping to shape those needs and shape the future really benefits enormously your students. And if your students are successful, everybody wins, the economy grows, the pot grows, and there's more opportunity for shared prosperity in the region. But just one last comment, and then the chat function is very active. Rachel, I'm sure, is monitoring it, and we'll get some comments and questions from the field in. But anybody want to make one last comment on this? Anne.
Bob, I'll jump in. Just a couple things that haven't been mentioned by my amazing colleagues. Two I'll put out there. One is that we looked at our advisory boards, and this goes back to even before I came to Nova, and it's continued. And what we found on some of our advisory boards were very well-meaning local companies that did not hire our graduates. And so they were giving us lots of advice, which was lovely. But then when we looked to see, they did not hire any of our folks. So we completely restructured the way we did our advisory councils and really turned them into key advisory groups that look at the curriculum, that have commitments around hiring our graduates. We know they hire our graduates. We know they do well. And we know they're very frank and honest with us about what we need to change. And then the other thing I would say is that frequently bluntly, I think sometimes college presidents think about approaching industry for funding. Like, we need a lab, we need this, we need that. In some of the really high demand areas that we're facing right now, we cannot afford faculty, we cannot find faculty. And so we've got folks in IT, we've got folks now in healthcare who are effectively giving us faculty members, clinical faculty members who serve as adjuncts in healthcare. We're starting those agreements with local hospital systems, and they're catching on very, very quickly. And then in IT, especially around data center operations, I think the majority of the world's data flows through Northern Virginia, and it's the data center hub of certainly the United States, if not the world. They can't find enough of a workforce. We can't hire faculty because they're all working in data centers. So they've actually lent us their folks to serve as credentialed faculty members in our classrooms. So I think the power of these partnerships is that they're multidimensional and multi-layer, and they're very deep. They're not just, hey, let's buy a table at an event, let's have a conversation, but it's how can we co-create these programs? How can we help you staff them? Because to your point, it is a virtual cycle. They're going to benefit, and certainly our students benefit.
Great, that's a great point at which to stop and then move on. Lee, you want a quick comment?
Just a real quick comment. So on assessing the levels of partnerships, so Opportunity America put together this wonderful framework to allow you to assess your level of engagement with partnerships. And we were able to use that and determine that we have over 700 partnerships at Pima, but they're all at different levels of development. So I think that's another important part, that assessment of that relationship.
I'll put a quick plug in for the survey report you're going to hear from my colleague Joe Fuller, who went out interviewing business leaders and community college leaders to see whether, where the gaps were and how they think about partnerships, which group tends to think that their partnerships are working well when the other group is not so sure, et cetera. That is, will be right at the opening of the afternoon session. Joe will be presenting the results of that survey. Rachel, what are you finding? What give us some couple of questions at least from the chat that seem to be picking up steam. I've been casting one eye over there. I see that there's interest in this question of relationship with workforce boards, for example.
Yeah, lots of activity in the chat, but Maria's question seemed to have a lot of enthusiasm, so maybe we'll start with that one. She wants to know how the colleges would assess their relationships with local workforce boards, what's working, but also what could be working better. And Tanya from Massachusetts has added to that question, how do you avoid duplication with your local workforce boards? How do you collaborate and work together on LMI, employer engagement, et cetera? I know there was a comment in the chat from Ian Rourke from Pima on this point. I don't know, Lee, if you want to kick us off, or if someone else is enthusiastic to share about this topic of alignment with the workforce boards.
I'd be glad to say a few words about that, but I think it goes back to a point that Brenda made earlier, and that is, and Ann followed up with it, is the open and honest conversations. So when we sat down with our local workforce board, I mean, we were in competition with each other, and they thought they had to be the ones, developing the partnerships, and they would tell us what we needed to do. And so we had to engage in these open conversations and work through, how do we align? I mean, it's not perfect. I don't want to mislead everyone that everything's perfect now, but it's much better because of that level of candor, if you will. We also have a seat on the local workforce development board, so that's an important piece of that, but we're actively engaged. We just don't sit there and go and listen. We actually engage, we work with the staff, et cetera. So I think that's another important facet to all of this. And we help them think about things that they hadn't thought about. And fortunately for me, I also sit on the National Association of Workforce Boards. So we have that connection to the national side of the equation as well.
And your president, David, sits on the,
yes,
on the local board for you. That sends a message as well.
Right. So David is our representative. And then our adult ed assistant vice chancellor sits on that local workforce board as well. So we bring in our adult ed programming to the table.
Rachel, I'd add that my VP of Workforce sits on one of our local workforce boards. We have 6 campuses. We serve multiple counties and independent cities. So Steve Partridge sits on one, our Alexandria Provost, Annette Hangry sits on another. And we actually provide the workforce boards with labor market information and reports that are generated out of that part of our house that is under Steve's purview as well. So there's a really strong collaborative arrangement. I would also extend that to the local economic development authorities. So we have folks who are sitting on the EDAs across our region, and we provide them with LMI as well.
I would add to that, we also have always had a leadership role with our local workforce board. I've served on it for many years, and now our vice president for strategic and institutional development that has the employer connections does. But to Ann's point, we also look at it from then how does our local workforce board as part of the statewide workforce boards through Jobs Ohio, and then that economic development intermediary that I referenced earlier in terms of Team Neo, that's where I focus a lot of my time in terms of that economic development and workforce development, because we know, and especially in Northeast Ohio, it is regional. And working with our other higher education partners, both 2- and 4-year public and private, is extremely important as part of that overall solution. So it really is multifaceted.
Hey, Rachel, I do want to add one thing that was a game changer for us was to get beyond conversation, to get people on our locations. We serve several counties and 10 locations. We literally have formed tours for our state workforce board and the local workforce board, because they think that they know our capability, but they really do not know our capability until they come physically to our campuses and our locations. So we formed a series of tours that we do not just with high schools, but with our economic developers, so that they really intimately understand what we're doing, as well as sitting on their boards. Now they're actively engaged with us.
Rachel, shall we move on to another topic?
Yeah, sounds good. I also saw a lot of energy in the chat around this faculty buy-in question, particularly around tenured faculty and how to get them on board with a mission where good jobs are kind of at the focus of the work. Maybe I'll start with Anne here. I see you enthusiastically nodding. I know this has been a big piece of Nova's story, but we'll turn to others as well.
Sure. I mean, one thing I would say is you first start in the programs where it makes the most sense, right? So we've got credit programs that are really career pathway programs in IT, in the trades, in healthcare, in administration of justice, in childcare. So you're really starting with faculty who understand from the jump that they're really addressing the needs of students who are saying, I'm looking at this as my stepping stone to a career. And then you have them work really closely with non-credit counterparts. So, you really want to start with folks who already understand that. I would say that is, as somebody who taught English, that's probably not the department you start with. But then the other thing we talk about a lot at Nova is that nobody comes to college to be unemployed at the end, right? And we do live in a region where, for a lot of reasons, including government contracting, a bachelor's degree is often the entry-level position. So that's another reason why we're really intent on bridging. So the non-credit bridges to the credit. Both of those avenues can lead to transfer within the region so that students can continue their degrees and earn bachelor's degrees. We in Virginia do not have community college baccalaureate, so we work really closely with our transfer institutions. And then faculty see, oh, I play a role in this, right? So these students may start here, but they're going to come through my classes. And so that's a benefit to everybody.
I think another thing that we've done, sorry, Lorraine, Martha,
That's okay.
Marsha,
You're
just
good.
jumped in. One of the things that we did is in petrochemical, we had faculty who had been in the industry, but had worked for us for quite a few years. Well, things in industry had changed. And so we provided externships to them. And that wasn't because we could do it. It was because our industry partners allowed us the time where our faculty could have externships. And so the faculty in that department, they wrote a one-pager of where do they think they need to learn, or what do they need to be updated on. And so we paid them to go to those plant sites and do an externship. Sometimes it was a week, sometimes it was 2 weeks, but it was allowing them to see how the industry had changed. And we have to give that professional development opportunity. And again, that became very clear when you have an employer that said, well, you guys can keep doing that, but we're not going to hire your students, because no faculty wants to train students for jobs that aren't out there. And so that really made a huge difference. Now, we had never done externships. You know, what do you pay them? So don't let your own internal systems stop you from doing some of this creative professional development. And we're going to do it again. It's not a one-time and done thing. It is really, how do you continue to make sure that you're developing your faculty and getting more creative? And it's not like they can just go to a conference to do that. And so engaging them in their own development and understanding how the industry's changed.
One piece that I would add to it from an institutional perspective of part of our redesign work has really been around our academic and cluster review process. That has been a redesign, also coming out of student learning and assessment. And so faculty have been driving that design. You know, we really believe that people support what it is that they help to create. And in this case, we have an interactive dashboard for all of that. And data from the post-secondary employment outcomes project really helps to provide our faculty with those long-term earnings information. And then based on our students and using the unemployment insurance data and other federal data, so that they can actually see how our students are and what the results have been. In addition to, the dashboard has our graduate tracking survey information, other National Student Clearinghouse information. So that's integral to what they're utilizing day in and day out. And so that, you know, again, they're embracing that, and they've been part of the design that made that happen. And that's been a transformational institutional change that our faculty have really driven.
I wonder, Dr. Woodward, if you want to jump in here and share a little bit as well about how Mississippi Gulf Coast is thinking about tracking of outcomes on the labor market side, but also on equity and enrollment of programs and who it is that is getting access to good jobs.
Sure. Yeah, I think all of us are very much interested in getting our arms around big data. So one of the ideas that we do now, we incorporate into every one of our programs, is that we're able to gather hundreds of variables on each program, and we put it through data visualization, and we have a programmatic review. I sit down with our president every year and we review every program and we rank them. We have health metrics. We have 15 specific health metrics that universally compare programs head to head to say, how healthy is this program as compared to last year? How healthy is this program as compared to other programs in the institution? And putting it through data visualization is really important because it allows us to disaggregate the data on every one of those variables. So if we're looking at retention, okay, retention is not great in that program. Well, that doesn't tell you a whole lot, honestly. But if I know that I'm not retaining African-American students, I'm not retaining older students, I'm not retaining females, suddenly that data has actionable power. So every one of our programs, we use these health metrics to begin to see signals of great success and signals that may worry us. And we do an investigation after that initial meeting with our president. And what this allows us to do is, in a very real time, ensure that we're being relevant to industry. If students are not being hired, that's one of the health metrics, job placement. So it helps us to right size our faculty, and it helps us to ensure that we have a very targeted approach to programmatic improvement and continuous improvement all the time.
We have 1 minute before we're scheduled to go into our breakouts, which will be randomly assigned. I want to use this minute first to thank our wonderful panel of college leaders. This has been a really rich conversation. And I would also just kind of looking ahead here. So we've got a 20-minute breakout. We'll then reconvene for closing remarks from Maria Flynn, as I mentioned before. We then have a 45-minute break, and we're asking that you stay logged in if you can. It will make it much easier for our tech team. Allie, are we posting the prompt for the breakout? Yeah, great, thank you. I ask and it immediately appears. So we're asking you in your breakout sessions, kind of what are one or two big takeaways on the role that community colleges can play in the regional economy? What have you learned both out of this discussion and those of you who've had a chance to at least browse the case studies? So big takeaways on the role of community colleges in their regional economy. I think that's it. So we're ready to move now into breakouts.